Hello and welcome to Gyan Junction. Today we're diving headfirst into the wild, wacky, and often surprisingly depressing world of trade wars. Because let's face it, the phrase trade war sounds a bit dry, doesn't it? Like something you'd find buried in a textbook next to a diagram of how a bill becomes a law. But trust me, this stuff is anything but dull. We're talking about countries going head to head, throwing tariffs around like confetti at a particularly aggressive parade. We're talking about the global economy being held hostage by squabbling politicians. We're talking about you, yes, you, potentially paying more for your morning coffee because some guy in a suit on the other side of the world decided to play hardball with banana imports. Over the next few minutes, we'll be exploring what trade wars are, why they happen, hint, it's not always pretty, and the lasting impact they can have on the world. We'll be looking at some of the biggest trade spats in history, from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which honestly sounds more like a rejected Harry Potter spell than a piece of legislation, to the more recent US-China trade war, which, let's be honest, feels like it's been going on longer than some of our viewers have been alive. Welcome to our deep dive into the world of trade wars. Today, we'll explore what trade wars are, their impacts, and some of the most significant trade wars in history. Our first stop on this whirlwind tour of economic mayhem takes us back to the 1930s, a time of flapper dresses, jazz music, and oh yeah, the worst economic depression the world had ever seen. The Great Depression, as it's more commonly known, was not a fun time. Think of it as the economic equivalent of that awkward family reunion where everyone's arguing about politics and spilling dip on the carpet. So, picture this. America's economy is in the toilet. Unemployment is skyrocketing, bread lines are stretching for blocks, and people are starting to eat their shoes. Okay, maybe not that last part, but things were bleak. Enter the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, a piece of legislation that on the surface seemed like a good idea. The goal? Protect American businesses and farmers by slapping hefty tariffs on imported goods. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, here's where things went off the rails faster than a runaway train full of angry raccoons. Other countries, understandably miffed by America's ME-first approach to global trade, retaliated with their own tariffs. Suddenly, everyone was taxing everything, and global trade ground to a screeching halt. Economists still debate just how much Smoot-Hawley contributed to the severity of the Great Depression. But one thing's for sure, it didn't help. It was like trying to put out a grease fire with gasoline while wearing a suit made of $100 bills. Not exactly the best look. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act serves as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that even with the best of intentions, messing with the delicate ecosystem of global trade can have disastrous, unintended consequences. It's a lesson some world leaders seem determined to learn the hard way, but more on that later. Okay, buckle up, because our next trade war involves everyone's favorite yellow fruit, the banana. Yes, you heard that right. From the 1990s to the mid-2000s, the world was embroiled in what became known as the Banana Wars. The main players were the United States and the European Union, and the bone of contention was bananas. The EU's preferential trade agreement with former colonies in the Caribbean and Africa gave those countries an advantage, according to the US. Now you might be thinking, bananas really? Well, not literally war, but it was a pretty big deal. The US, on behalf of its banana producers, took the EU to the World Trade Organization. What followed was over a decade of legal wrangling and diplomatic standoffs. The WTO ruled in favor of the US, then the EU changed its policies, then the US complained again. It was like watching a tennis match played with a banana instead of a ball. The Banana Wars highlight the complexities of international trade and the challenges of balancing competing interests. It also proves that even the most seemingly innocuous of fruits can become a flashpoint for global conflict. So, next time you're enjoying a banana smoothie, take a moment to appreciate the trade war that made it all possible. Chapter 3. Let's rewind the clock to the 1980s, a time of shoulder pads, leg warmers, and a little thing called the US-Japan trade war. This one was a doozy, folks, fueled by economic anxiety, technological innovation, and a healthy dose of good old-fashioned Cold War paranoia. Japan, having risen from the ashes of World War II to become an economic powerhouse, was flooding the US market with affordable, high-quality electronics and automobiles. Think Sony Walkmans, Toyota Corollas, and those clunky but oh-so-satisfying VHS tapes. American consumers, delighted by these cheaper and often superior products, were snapping them up faster than you could say Pac-Man. American industries, on the other hand, were not so thrilled. Faced with stiff competition from their Japanese counterparts, they cried foul, accusing Japan of unfair trade practices, currency manipulation, and stealing intellectual property. The US government, eager to protect domestic industries and wary of Japan's growing economic might, listened intently. Thus began a trade war characterized by tariffs, quotas, and enough political posturing to make a sumo wrestler blush. The US slapped import restrictions on Japanese cars, electronics, and steel, while Japan retaliated with tariffs on American agricultural products. It was a trade war fought with semiconductors and soybeans, Walkmans, and wheat. The US-Japan trade war had a profound impact on both countries, shaping their economies and their relationship for decades to come. It also highlighted the growing pains of globalization as countries grappled with the challenges of competing in an increasingly interconnected world. Plus, it gave us some truly amazing 80s-era commercials, so there's that. To stifle its economic rise, and so began a trade war unlike any other, characterized by tit-for-tat tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods. The US slapped tariffs on Chinese solar panels, washing machines, and steel, while China retaliated with tariffs on American soybeans, pork, and automobiles. It was like watching two economic superpowers duke it out with giant fly swatters made of money. The US-China trade war has had a ripple effect across the global economy, disrupting supply chains, raising prices for consumers, and fueling uncertainty in financial markets. It's also strained relations between the world's two largest economies, raising fears of a new Cold War. The outcome of this trade war is still uncertain, but one thing's for sure: it's a high-stakes game with no easy answers. And as with any good trade war, there are sure to be unintended consequences that will be felt for years to come. Chapter 5, remember that whole trade war with China thing we were just talking about? Well, it turns out the US had enough tariffs to go around because in 2018 they decided to slap some on their allies too, because why have strong international relations when you can have, you guessed it, more tariffs? This time the targets were steel and aluminum imports. And the justification was, wait for it, national security. Yes, you read that right. The US government argued that importing steel and aluminum from other countries, including close allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, posed a threat to national security. Now you might be wondering how exactly Canadian steel is a national security threat. Well, so were a lot of people, including the Canadians, Mexicans, and Europeans who suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of these tariffs. They responded, as you might expect, with tariffs of their own, targeting American products like bourbon, motorcycles, and orange juice. Because nothing says we're taking you seriously like a tariff on Jack Daniels. The steel and aluminum tariffs caused a rift between the US and its allies, strained diplomatic relations, and disrupted global supply chains. They also raised prices for consumers and businesses. Because, as we've learned by now, tariffs are basically just taxes that everyone ends up paying. The steel and aluminum tariffs were a masterclass in how to alienate your allies, disrupt global trade, and make everyone just a little bit poorer. But hey, at least the national security of American steel and aluminum producers was assured, right? So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour of some of the most significant trade wars in history. From the banana-fueled battles of the 1990s to the ongoing US-China trade war, we've seen how quickly things can escalate when countries start throwing tariffs around like confetti at a particularly aggressive economic summit. The truth is, trade wars are rarely, if ever, a good idea. They disrupt global trade, raise prices for consumers, hurt businesses, and strain diplomatic relations. They're like trying to solve a disagreement by setting fire to everyone's shoes. Sure, it might feel satisfying in the moment, but ultimately, everyone ends up with burnt feet and a lingering smell of regret. So the next time you hear a politician talking tough on trade, remember this: trade wars are complex, messy, and rarely have any real winners. Unless, of course, you're a fan of economic instability, political grandstanding, and paying more for your morning coffee. In which case, have we got a trade war for you? Trade wars have far-reaching consequences, affecting economies, businesses, and consumers worldwide. Understanding their history and impact can help us navigate the complexities of global trade. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful content.